In this video, we're going to take a look at solving absolute value equations. Equations involving absolute value, they are similar to other equations that you have solved, but the first thing we need to do is get just the absolute value stuff by itself, and then once we've done that, we write two equations that will represent the two different situations that we can have going on. Because remember, if I look at this first one, to get 36 out, if I take the absolute value, well, this in here could be 36, because the absolute value of 36 is just 36, or it could be negative 36, because the absolute value of negative 36 is a positive 36, because remember, absolute value is a number's distance from 0. So we use that fact to allow us to write two equations that we can solve and get our solutions. So let's go ahead and work on this first one here. Our first equation is always going to be just what we see there, but forget the absolute values. So in this case, we have 3x equals 36, divide by 3 on both sides, and we have x equals 12. My second equation is going to be being equal to the opposite. So we have negative, or 36 there, well, it's going to be equal to negative 36 as well. So divide by 3, divide by 3. Now we have x equals negative 36 divided by 3 is negative 12. If I check, well, 12 times 3 is 36, the absolute value of which is 36. And then we have negative 12. Negative 12 times 3 is negative 36. Take the absolute value of that, which is also 36. Let's take a look at this one down here. In this case, the absolute value stuff isn't by itself on the left. We've got this minus 7 here. So the first thing we need to do is get rid of that. How do we do that? Well, how do we get rid of things when we're trying to solve equations? We do the opposite. So we're going to add 7 to both sides of our equation. Now I have the absolute value of x left over, and that's equal to 7 minus 1, which is 6. Now, the absolute value of x equals 6. Well, that means that x is going to be equal to either 6, remember the first one, just forget the absolute values, or we write the opposite, so negative 6. And if I go back and put those in, well, 6, the absolute value of which is 6, minus 7 is negative 1, and again, put that one back in. Negative 6, the absolute value is 6, minus 7 is also negative 1. Alright, let's take a look at this next one. Here we have a negative sitting out front the absolute value. Remember, that's like a negative 1. So the first thing we need to do is get rid of that, and to do that I'm going to divide by negative 1 on both sides. So now I have the absolute value of 2x is equal to 12. Okay, so very similar to my first one over here, I'm going to have 2x equals 12, divide by 2 on both sides, and I'm left with x equals 6. And my second equation is going to be 2x equals negative 12. Again, divide by 2 on both sides, and we get x equals negative 6. Okay, then here again we've got something extra here. The absolute value needs to get by itself. So to do that, in this case, we're going to add 13 to both sides. So we add 13. Excuse me. Add 13 to both sides. And we are left with the absolute value of 8x equals 13 plus 11 is going to be 24. Okay, so now I can write, I have my absolute value by itself, so I can write my two equations. The first one will be 8x equals 24. The second will be 8x is equal to negative 24. Solve each of those by dividing by 8. Divide by 8, x equals 3, and divide by 8 over here, x equals negative 3. Alright. Let's take a look at these last few. In this one, we're multiplying by that 2 out front. We got to get rid of that because we just have to have our absolute value thing by itself. So I'm going to divide by 2. Divide by 2. So now I have x plus 1, the absolute value, equals 7. Okay? Now write my two equations. X plus 1, the first one, remember, just forget the absolute values, equals 7. The second, x plus 1 equals negative 7. Again, solve each of those. So we subtract 7, x equals 6. And over here, subtract 1 on both sides, and we have x is equal to negative 8. Again, we could check those. 6 plus 1, 7, the absolute value of which is 7, times 2 is 14. Then negative 8 plus 1 would be negative 7, absolute value of which is 7, times 2 is 14. Now this one, again, we've got to get the absolute value stuff by itself first. So the first thing I'm going to do is get rid of this minus 7. We could treat it almost the same as if this piece was 3x. The absolute value piece was like an x. So 3x minus 7. We have to get rid of the minus 7 first. So we're going to add 7 to both sides. So then I have 3 times the absolute value of 3x. Try and make your absolute values so that they're taller, so they're not don't look like ones. Then 2 plus 7 is 9. Then we still don't have the absolute value by itself. Got to divide by 3 on each side. Now we have the absolute value of 3x equals 3. Finally, write my two equations. First one is 3x equals 3. Just forget the absolute values. The second one, write it equal to the opposite. So that would be equals negative 3. Divide by 3. X equals 1. And divide by 3 here. X is equal to negative 1. Again, solving absolute value equations using the same skills that we've used before, except that we have to solve two equations in each case. Also remember, we have to get the absolute value thing by itself first, then we go ahead and write our two equations. Hope this is helpful. Remember, in math, practice makes perfect.